joining us for this parent workshop this afternoon. The theme is common questions about your toddler. So thank you for those who are joining us live. If you've been unable to join us live this afternoon, a recording of this webinar will be available for you to view later on. Okay, let's get started. Okay, let's start with some introductions. My name is Stephen Foster, Steve. I'm the Assistant Head of the Early Years Centre here at Harrow Bangkok, and I'm joined by my colleagues. If they would like to introduce themselves, Hannah.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I am the year group leader for our Lion Cubs toddler year group, and I'm also one of the teachers for one of our toddler only classes.
Okay, and I'm Miss Amy. I am the lower school inclusion manager, but I am also the speech and language therapist here at Harrow, and I work across all of lower school.
Thank you. Okay, so why are we here this afternoon? We get asked lots and lots of questions about the development of children of this age from birth to 3. It's a really crucially important time, and there are various important milestones that happen along the way. And what we've done is collated some of the most common and important questions that we get asked and put them into an informative presentation where we'll be able to give you some tips and advice and reasoning behind why these things may be happening. So that's the reason that we are here this afternoon. So without further ado, we'll get started with our first common question. I'm handing over to Miss Hannah.
Okay, we thought we'd start with one of the most important questions or most common questions that we get asked. It's a really challenging part of parenting a toddler. The question is, why does my child have tantrums? It's very, very difficult as a parent to deal with them. And it's something nobody tells you how to deal with when you become a parent. So here's some information about why they happen and how you can help to deal with them. So the first one is, why do they have tantrums? Well, sometimes they're frustrated. There's something that's upsetting them, but they can't communicate it and they can't do anything about it. It's beyond their control. Quite often also it's tiredness. You might find that tantrums happen close to nap time or close to bedtime when they just don't have the ability to cope with whatever they're faced with that day. They don't have the language to communicate their needs. They might have gone to the toilet and they can't tell you. They might be tired and they can't explain it in words. Another reason that they might have tantrums is that they're developing a sense of self. It's a normal part of child development, understanding that they are their own person and that they can say yes or no, or have their own views of what to do. So it's very, very normal part of child development. And if they have tantrums, it's good because they're developing their own personality and their own sense of self. But there are things that you can do to help you cope with them, because they can be very, very, very challenging, especially when they happen in public with other people around. I remember when I was a parent of young children, if it happened when I was at the supermarket or out somewhere in public, it was very stressful as a parent. So our first piece of advice is to stay calm, or try to stay calm. It's easier said than done. If my own children were having a tantrum, I could feel my blood pressure rising and rising, and I find myself getting more and more stressed. Take a minute, take a deep breath, try and stay calm. It's easier said than done, but it really helps. If the children see that you're stressed and anxious, they will become more stressed and anxious too. You can also name their emotions. You can tell them, I can see that you're really upset. I can see that this is really difficult for you. I can see that you're tired. It's really hard, isn't it? And that validates what they're trying to express to you, and it makes them feel like you're listening. And it makes them feel like they're being understood, even if they can't express that in words. They need your help to help you, to help them regulate their emotions. And it's a skill that happens over many, many, many years. And they're looking to you for your support to help them deal with these really big emotions that they're dealing with. Don't try and reason with them or have a discussion with them when they are having a tantrum. If they are screaming and crying and throwing themselves on the floor, they're not in a state to listen to you and understand what you're saying. So what we recommend is trying to get them calm first. Make sure they're safe, make sure they're not going to hurt themselves if they're having a tantrum and kicking the floor, for example, but leave them and just say, look, I can see that you're finding this difficult. We'll talk when you calm down, and let them calm down first. It might take a while, but it will happen. You can show that you're being caring. You can pat them on the back. You can give them a hug. You can show that you can see that it's difficult for them, but let them calm down first. Once they've calmed down, then you can have a discussion with them. Okay, I can see that you've been upset. Let's talk about what you can do. Let's see what we can do to help. Things that really help also are routines. So something that we use a lot in toddler only is like a visual timetable of the day. This is what's going to happen today. They know that when they come in, they wash their hands, we go to play, they have snack. There's a routine to every day. Children love routine and they love being able to predict what comes next. If they don't know what's happening, sometimes they feel out of control and they find it really upsetting. So having routines at home really, really, really help. And the last thing is to focus on the positive. Even if they've kicked and punched and thrown things across the room in a big tantrum, if they eventually sit down and calm down, focus on the good things that they've done. Well done for sitting down. Well done for calming down. Great job. Now we're ready to have a talk. So there's no magical solution to these tantrums, but a few tips that can help. And if you want to talk to us more, please speak to any of the toddler staff and we can give you some more tips on how to deal with these when they happen at home, because they will. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Steve to carry on the theme of sleep.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, so the next common question we get asked is all about sleep and the importance of sleep. How much sleep does my child, my toddler, actually need? Sleep is one of the most critically important things that has an effect on early childhood development. Indeed, it has an effect on all ages of children and adults throughout life. Research tells us that sleep and getting the correct amount of sleep directly correlates to things like well-being, physical health, happiness, your mood, and critically important, cognitive development. So how your child's brain is growing and developing at this really, really important age. Your child's brain at this age from birth to 5, which encompasses all of early years, will never grow as much as it will at any other point in life. So the things that are happening physiologically with your child's brain, the connections that are being built that are so fundamentally important for learning and development later in life are really, really critical at this point. And sleep has a massive impact on those things. Sleep can affect children's ability to concentrate. Sleep can affect your child's ability to regulate their emotions. So like Miss Hannah was talking about before, a meltdown or a tantrum could actually be the consequence of your child not having had enough sleep and therefore not being able to regulate their emotions and manage their feelings. It also affects our memory, our long-term and short-term memory, the ability to recall information and facts and knowledge, all is directly correlated between getting the right amount of sleep. So it is hugely, hugely important. And it can be often something that we overlook as important to a child's general well-being and development. So the research tells us that a toddler age child, so between birth and 3, needs approximately 10 to 13 hours sleep in any 24-hour window. So that includes nighttime sleeping and naps during the latter part of the morning or in the afternoon. There's no right and wrong time for a child to have a nap. It's when they need it. And you will learn your child's rhythm as such with regard to sleep patterns and how much they need. For children who attend school, who come to our toddler classes, our classes do start quite early in the morning. And some of our families have long journeys to get into school. So children are spending up to an hour perhaps in the car. That means that they need to have a bedtime which is appropriate and which is going to facilitate having enough sleep at night time. So they need to be going to bed by 7:30 a.m. to ensure that they've got all of the energy that they need, that they get the most out of the time that they are at school. So that's a rough guide to how much sleep your child will need. There may be slight variations, as with anything in life, but typically between 10 to 13 hours sleep is required. Okay, so how do we go about ensuring this happens? Well, back to what Miss Hannah was talking about before, routines are so important for young children. And the same is applied to sleep. Having a good routine at night will help your child get into that sleepy phase, that cozy, ready for bed, ready to fall asleep type mood. So first and foremost, turn off screens, computers, and bright lights. And I know we've probably heard this message before, and I suppose as adults, we can be guilty ourselves of knowing what the right thing is to do and then not actually acting on that. But having that screen time right before going to sleep really stimulates the brain, stimulates your mind, and your body and mind isn't in the right place to be able to fall asleep. Having a routine that the children expect, like having a bath, putting on pajamas, brushing teeth, all of those things signal to the child that it is bedtime, sleep is approaching. Sharing a book, singing a lullaby, any of those things at night that just help your child to calm down and get into that nice state, ready to go to sleep. Children like security blankets. They may have a favorite blanket they want to take to bed, a favorite soft toy. Those things are absolutely fine. All of those things are associative for the child with going to sleep. And very importantly as well, don't let your child fall asleep on the couch or in a place that isn't their own regular sleeping place, their own bed if they're old enough. The best time to put your child to bed is when they are sleepy, not when they've already fallen asleep, because then you will know trying to move a toddler child once they're asleep in such a delicate manner into bed is not an easy thing. And they're going to wake up and they're going to be distressed, and all of that good routine that's happened before to get them to that sleep stage will have to be done again. It won't have worked because they've woken up and they're not sure of where they are. So their own bed, if they're old enough, is what we would recommend. But I would really, really think if your child is going to bed 9, 10, 11, and then they're coming to school for a start around 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, will your child be getting the most out of school? Will they be able to concentrate? The answer is probably not. So adjust the bedtimes and make sure they're getting across a 24-hour period between 10 and 13 hours of sleep. That is what we would recommend. Okay, I think it's me again. The next common question we get asked is all about friends. Does my child have friends? At this very young age, children are still learning really important social skills, which are necessary to be able to form friendships. So don't be concerned if your child appears to not have friends. I say that in inverted commas, or a best friend at this stage. They're still learning what it means to be a friend, the social skills they need. How do I behave? How do I react? And part of our job as early years educators at Harrow Bangkok is to help your child and all children with learning and developing these skills. We know over the last 3 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on children's social interactions and friendships that they have been able to form, because many of our children have spent significant amount of time, understandably so because of restrictions and lockdowns, not socializing and not making friends. They've just been with their immediate family. And in fact, if your child is a toddler age child, they've never known life before COVID. So it's meant that certain things that were helpful for social interaction, such as reading a facial expression, have not necessarily been there. And I'm sure Amy can talk about that, how that affects communication as well later on. So this is meant for us at Harrow Bangkok, supporting children's personal, social, and emotional development is right at the forefront of everything we do. It always has been, but it's more crucial now more than ever. And that's a big, big focus in our curriculum, helping children to socialize, to make friends, to interact with each other appropriately, to share, to cooperate, to express themselves. And we do this by offering what we describe as a play-based curriculum. Now, lots of people hear the word play and think, well, we send our children to school because they wanted to learn. Well, our youngest children, between birth and 5, the way they learn best is through play. And all of the research around early childhood tells us that when children are engaged, when they are leading their own play, that they thrive and that they flourish. They learn to cooperate, they learn to share, they need to learn to understand themselves and others around them. And all of these things are really, really important and fundamental for young children to build relationships with their peers. These early experiences and social interactions are literally, as I said before, helping build your child's brain, okay? All of the things that happen directly affect our social skills, our attitudes, our dispositions, and as I said before, our cognitive development, things like memory, recall, our ability to absorb new information. All of these things are interconnected and linked in early childhood. So how do we do that at school? Well, adults are here to help, support, model, and guide. Something we call interacting. So every single day when your child comes to us at school, they are having interactions with us. Some of these interactions are verbal, depending on the child's level of language acquisition. Some of these interactions are the things that we model and show the children. So we do not sit by and watch the children play. We get involved with their play. We model how to be social. We model sharing. We model playing cooperatively with the children. We help them to learn and develop those skills. And that's something you can do at home as well. When the children are at home and they are playing, when you are with them, you're modeling the behaviors that we want and that we expect. Okay, Ms. Hannah, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, so there are different typical stages of play, different developmental stages of play. But as we know, young children, they're not fixed and they don't always go in a straight line through these different stages. They may go through many different pathways. They may even revert in their stages of play. But these are just some of the typical developmental stages of play that you may see with your children. So here you can see a representation of these types of play on the graphic here. All of these types of play are important. All of these types of play are the building blocks of social interaction and communication and cooperation. So no one stage is less valid or less important. We start with typically unoccupied play. So you can see the little girl at the window there gazing out. And this type of play, this stage, can be quite deceptive because looking at that graphic, it looks like the child isn't actually playing at all, okay? But this is a really important initial stage of play. It's giving the child time to observe, to look at their surroundings and to begin to react to their surroundings. So children, they need to see what's happening. They need to view the world around them. So that's very, very important as well. So if your child is very young and at that stage where they are just absorbing, and sometimes you can see it on their faces, you can see them just taking things in, that is a very valid and very important first step or first stage in the play process. The next picture you can see is a little boy with a dinosaur and an action figure, and he's playing by himself. We call that stage a solitary stage of play. And this is very, very common for toddler children who are just still learning to be independent. And again, they need that time for that play to be playing by themselves. It's nothing to be worried about. It's nothing to be concerned about. We then get the sort of onlooker stage, which is the next phase of play. We can see the little boy in the red dungarees there. Watching others playing is important, okay? So because children are learning to develop and understand the social skills needed for play. So watching two or more other children play, the child is taking in, sometimes often subconsciously, the type of things that are happening when children are engaged in that two-way cooperative play. We then have parallel play. You can see two children here playing alongside each other, and this typically happens around 2 years old. So children are playing parallel alongside each other. And it may look like that they're not particularly paying much attention to each other, but often you will see, if you take a step back and observe what's happening, that they are mimicking each other's behavior and they are learning from each other. Very often, like I said, all these things happening subconsciously. The child may not be aware that these processes are happening, but they are still very, very important in building up those foundations for the cooperative play that we have as the final sort of typical stage. Then we have what we call associative play. And you can see that represented here by two children playing with some blocks. And at this stage is where the children are really beginning to make friendships because they're joining in with each other's play. They're starting to be able to share and to cooperate and take turns, all of those things that are necessary for social interactions, for building friendships. That's not to say that any of the other stages, children don't have deep bonds with adults and other people. Of course they do, but it's this learning of social behavior that happens at this stage of associative play. And then the final stage of play is cooperative play. And this is where all of those other different types of play come together and the children are able to play together. And this really does vary depending on the child's experiences. So if your child has a couple of siblings, lots of cousins, a big family, it may happen a lot earlier. If not, or they've not had interaction due to things like COVID, it may happen later on in early years, even beyond toddlers. And as I said before, it's important to remember that children will display these different behaviors at different times. Children's learning and development is not a fixed thing. It doesn't always happen sequentially, one after the other. It can go backwards, it can go forwards, it can advance in ways that you wouldn't expect, but we do have typical milestones. Like I say, every stage of play is really important and should be really valued in helping the development of social skills. So that's just a bit of background information about play and about the concern families may have that their child appears not to have friends. They do, they're just learning those social skills necessary to have friendships. Okay, that's me. I think I'm handing over to Miss Amy now.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So the first topic that I wanted to cover today is this question I get asked all the time. Why isn't my child speaking? Okay, so speech or speaking is actually one of the last stages of communication to develop. You can see from this diagram here, we've got lots and lots of different levels and different layers to communication development. And we've got right at the top, we've got speech sounds and talking. So those are the later stages of communication. And before that can happen, we need the earlier stages to be secure and in place. So before we can focus on speaking, we need to look at the child's ability to focus, so attention and listening. We need to look at their play skills, as Steve has just described. And we also need to look at the child's ability to understand language. Okay, and as your child is developing those skills, that's why the speaking becomes a later part of communication development. We need to be able to understand language and understand speech before we can use it. Okay, so children start developing their communication skills from birth, and every child is different. Some progress quickly and others do take that little bit longer. But what we would expect roughly by the toddler's age is for your child to be able to focus on an activity of their own choosing, so something that they're interested in and motivated by. We would be looking for your child to be able to understand familiar routines, so things like knowing when to go and get their shoes if you're going outside, or putting something away, or collecting a cup if it's a drink time or snack time. We'd also be looking for your child to be able to understand single words and some 2-word phrases. Okay, so what we tend to look at is your child might be able to recognize the names of different objects, different toys. They might know what you're talking about if you say, can you get the car? Can you get the teddy? We're going to have a bath. They might pick out that key word, bath, teddy, car, and show you that they can understand what that means. And they might also be able to understand if you're joining words together. So can you get me the blue car? So there's a bit more information and a bit more description. And then in terms of talking, we would be looking for your children to be able to use the same amount of words as they are understanding. So we would be looking for them to be able to say lots of single words on their own. So your child might be speaking with you just using one word at a time to ask for something, teddy or book or mummy, daddy, okay? They might also be starting to join words together as well. So at this age, when we talk about speaking, we're looking for single words, joining words, but we're also not expecting the speech itself to be fully clear for this age. So there are lots of things that you can do at home to help develop each of these stages of communication that will ultimately, in the long term, support with the speaking and the speech sound development as well. So on this slide, I've shared some key points and some key ideas with you. I've talked about minimizing distractions. I've talked about making sure you are at eye level with your child and getting their attention. Being at eye level is also really important because it can encourage the child to look at your face as you're communicating. So they're getting to see your expression. They're seeing if you're looking happy or if you're looking sad or tired. But they can also see your mouth moving as you're speaking. And that's really important for speech development, especially as we know at the moment in the community, we are wearing masks, whereas at home, you're not required to do that. You can have the mask and your child can see your mouth, okay? And when the child is watching your mouth move, it's firing off parts of their brain related to speech that will help them when they're ready to start their own speech, okay? I've also talked about thinking about language development here. I've suggested a strategy of copying your child. So if your child is playing, I want you to get down to their level, remember, be at eye level with them. And I want you to just listen to the words that they're saying while they're playing. And then you can just copy that word back to them. And this can be in any language. Obviously in school, we're talking about English, but at home, we're talking about your home language as well. And I will touch on that a little bit later. So copy your child, use the words that they're using. This shows them that you've understood them. And it also shows them that you can model that word back to them in a clear way if they haven't quite pronounced it in the right way yet. What you can also do by doing this is you're getting their attention, you're engaging them, and then you can start to build on their language skills. You can copy their word and add a new word. So for example, if you were playing with some toy cars or toy animals, your child might pick one up and they might say that they have the dog. And then you can repeat that back. Yes, dog. And then you might add another word to say big dog. Or you might talk about what the dog is doing. Dog is sleeping. That way you're extending your child's language, but there's no pressure on your child to have to do the same and to copy you. They're just listening and getting that good model of speaking. The next point I've made is about asking less questions and making more comments. Now, this is something whenever I do some training about communication, this is always something that I recommend because we all as adults and as teachers and parents, we find ourselves asking lots and lots of questions of our children. So we might say, what's that? What are you doing? What can you see? Tell me what this is. When we're asking questions, we're not providing the language model or the speech model for what it is that we want the child to say. So we're actually testing our children, we're not teaching them. So a better thing to do would be to make comments. So by this, I mean describe what you can see. So if you think you're going to ask your question, oh, what do you have? Instead of asking the question, you can say, I see you have the cup. I see you have a book. This way, you're modeling the language for the child. You're not testing them, you're teaching them. And you're just creating a very low pressure situation that will be more enjoyable for everyone in the long run. Because if you're asking questions and the child can't give the answer, that might create a little bit of frustration. Okay. And then the last point that I've made here is not speaking with a dummy. Okay, so if your child is using a dummy or a pacifier, what we don't want to see is we don't want them to have that in their mouth at lots of times across the day when they might be speaking, because this can actually prevent them from being able to speak clearly because they're learning to use their tongue and their lips in a different way. So anytime your child is speaking, if they are still using a dummy, I would ask that that be removed, okay? And I'll talk again a little bit more about this later. So these are my top tips, but there are lots of other things that you can do to help develop each stage of communication development. So I'm just going to run through a few of those with you now, and then we'll move on to my next question. So to work on attention and listening at home, make sure you get your child's attention before you interact with them. Use their name and get down to their face-to-face and eye level. Wait for them to look at you before you speak. And if possible, try to minimize the number of distractions that you have in your environment. So this might be putting away devices, turning off the TV, and even things like thinking about how many toys are out for your child to play with. If there are lots of toys, there are lots of possible distractions. So try to keep this to a limit of 2 or 3 at a time. Then for play, I want you to be thinking about teaching your child to play through modeling and repetition. Okay, so you can repeat the same play activity over and over. Watch your child first, see what they do and copy them. Keep it simple. Too many toys can be too distracting. With understanding language and with talking, think about being visual. So rather than just relying on words and on speaking alone, if you can, use objects or pictures or even gestures. So here at Harrow, we use keyword signing, where we use a gesture at the same time as speaking to give that child some more information and help them with their understanding. And then lastly, with the speech sounds element of communication, what your child is saying is as important as how they say it. I want you to think about providing good models of speech to your child with removing your mask at home and being able to show them how you form different sounds for speaking. Okay, so again, repeating it back to your child as you hear what they say. Remember, every child develops these skills at different times. Some make quick progress and others take longer. But if you try these things, hopefully you should be able to see some progress. Okay, so that's my first question finished. Now I'm going to move on to another one that I get asked all the time. When will my child be speaking in English? So again, thinking back to the previous slide with the communication steps, understanding comes before speaking. Okay, we do need to give our children lots of good models of language before they can start to learn to speak, and that's in their home language and in an additional language. When you're developing a second language, it can take a long time, a lot longer than we might expect. It can take between 2 to 7 years to become completely fluent. For our younger learners, it does tend to be a little bit quicker, but I think this is a really important piece of information for people to be aware of, because we have sometimes very high expectations, but actually research shows us that it can take that amount of time, 2 to 7 years. Okay. And again, for any child, when they begin to talk can vary regardless of what languages are involved. So there are lots of other questions that come up when we talk about acquiring or learning a second language. Another one of those questions that comes up is, does speaking more than one language cause a speech and language difficulty? And the quick answer to that is no, absolutely not. There's been lots and lots of research into the acquisition of multiple languages. And we know that learning more than one language at a time does not create a communication difficulty. And in fact, research has shown us that good first language development can help with acquiring and learning a second language, because you have that underlying language skill to hook onto. So this is why we always recommend that at home you continue to speak with your child in your first language, your strong language. Okay. Another question that comes up is, are bilingual children slower to start speaking? Again, there's no evidence that bilingual children learn to speak later than those children that only speak one language. Other times, parents will notice that their child might speak a mixture of languages in the same sentence, and they might think that's a problem. But actually, mixing the languages together is a very, very clever thing. And what that does is it shows us that the child is starting to learn and develop that second language while still learning their first language. So actually, it's a good thing when we can see them mixing the languages. What you can do at home is just continue to model one language with them if they're speaking to you in a mixture of two. And we do the same with that at school as well. Then another question that parents will ask me around learning English is, should I be speaking English with my child? Because this is the language that you are using at school. And just as I've said before, in school, we are practicing English with your children. They will get to hear it from our teachers and from our staff members here. So at home, I would suggest continuing with your first language. There's a number of reasons for this. Firstly, your home language is really important for your child to develop, because that's how they will interact with their family and their community. Secondly, practicing the first language, as we know, will help developing a second language. And then the last point is that if you are confident in your English ability, then that's fine. You can practice at certain times, whether you're reading a story at bedtime or at bath time. But there is no pressure for you to have to keep practicing this at home as well. Okay. And then other things that you can do at home to help in general, as I say, is continuing with your first language, but you might want to find out what stories and songs are being used at school, and you can replicate these at home. You might need to think about, at the end of the school day, giving your child just a little bit of a break, a bit of a timeout from using English, because it can be very, very tiring. If they're using a different language all day to their first language, they might just need a little bit of a break time from it. So bear that in mind. And then lastly, again, using visual cues. So just as we talked about for normal communication development, helping with developing multiple languages, again, if we can be visual and use gestures or objects, pictures, anything that will support the spoken language will be really helpful in this situation, and it will help with linking languages across from home and from school. Okay, so lots of information there about developing English. And now I'm going to move on to my final question about communication, which is, will YouTube teach my child to speak? Okay, so again, there's been lots and lots of research in this area. And what we know from that is that screen time can have a small amount of benefit for your child in developing language skills. But this is only the case when those apps that are being used or videos that are watched are of good, high quality. And this is key, an adult joins them. Okay, so an adult can watch at the same time, which means you can talk about it together as it's happening or afterwards. So if the child is left watching a screen or a device on their own, it won't have the same benefits. This is because screen time doesn't replicate normal interaction. It's not the same. You don't have that backwards and forwards of conversation. So having an adult joining and watching at the same time, you can make that happen. We also want to think about how much screen time we're giving our children, because this is the world we live in. We have technology everywhere and we all do this. But I think what we can be mindful of is doing it in a supportive way where we can. So those times when your child is using a screen, I want you to think about how long they are spending on that screen and are you joining them? Having too much screen time can have some negative effects on language development, on social skills, and on sleep, which we've already discussed earlier today. We know that screen time can actually be addictive, okay? So screen time, certain apps and videos, they can cause slight changes in the brain to the point where your child will want to see more and more and more. And then removing that device, removing that screen can be a real challenge because your child might then get very upset, okay? So that's why it's really important as early as you can when you're introducing screens, try to monitor and be very clear with your child on how long they're having that screen for and when you're going to stop and move on to something else. Okay, so my top tips around using screens, they are unavoidable, but things you can do to help: stick to a routine, only use devices at set times if you can help it, join in with your child when you can, and then think about putting screens away at certain times. So for example, meal times is a really nice time when you can have interaction and you can be talking to each other. So put that screen to one side and leave it there so you can have that communication. And then again, thinking about the bedtime routine, the guidelines, the recommendations is stop using the screens or devices for 1 to 2 hours before bed, because this will help your child's brain get into the right chemical state where they are ready for sleep. Okay, that's everything from me for now. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Hannah to talk about toilet training.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, these next questions is, when will my child be toilet trained? Usually when parents come for their first settling in visit with toddler only, that's something they're very keen to talk about, and there's a lot of concern that children might not be using the toilet yet. The first thing to say is every child is different. So you cannot compare one child to another, and they will all develop at different rates and do things in different orders. I have 3 boys, all of them were very different in when they started using the toilet. And unfortunately, as a parent, you can't control that. So the second thing is be patient. Sometimes you might be really keen to start the toilet training because it's convenient for you, but actually the child isn't ready. And the problem is, if you try to do it before they're ready, it can sometimes become something that's stressful and has the opposite effect and makes them wait until longer until they're ready to use the toilet. So it's got to be something fun. It's got to be something when they are ready. Try not to compare your child with other people's children the same age. They do develop at their own speed. Look for signs that they might be becoming ready. The first stage is usually that they might notice when they're doing a wee or they're doing a poo. They might tell you, but they might not tell you until after they've done it. And that's fine. It takes quite a long time between that stage and then being able to tell you that I'm going to go or I need to go. But that's the first sign that they're noticing it. So you can say, praising the positive, well done for noticing that. I'm really impressed, but don't expect that that means that they're ready to use the toilet on their own. But they may start to notice. Also, make sure that they're familiar with the routine of going to the toilet. Do they know what that means? Do they know what happens in the toilet? Or is it something secret and scary in your house? Can you take them to the toilet with you and show them what you do when you go to the toilet? I don't know what happens in different households, but actually it's a really important thing for children to see it modeled by their parents or by their siblings. You know, this is what we do when we go to the toilet. And they might want to watch you and learn to see what you do. It also makes it so it's something that's not scary. When the children are at toddler only, all of our children go and wash their hands in the toilet many times a day. And they're in a very good routine. They know what to do when they're in there. And so what you need to do is show them the other routines that you have when you go to the toilet, and make it normal and help educate them that way. My final tip is to be prepared. So keeping calm will make toilet training a lot less stressful. Accidents will happen many, many, many times. And if the children have an accident and go to the toilet somewhere when they're not wearing a nappy, if it becomes something really stressful and they feel like they've done something wrong, then it makes them regress, and it makes them maybe not develop as quickly as they might. So be prepared for accidents, and also reassure the children that it's fine. If accidents happen in our toddler only room, we're very calm about it. We say, don't worry, accidents happen, we'll clean it up and we'll keep trying next time. So try and stay very positive about it. Try and be prepared for accidents. Our CCAs, particularly in toddler only, are absolutely amazing at helping children learn to use the toilet. And something we do quite regularly is take them to the toilet, sit them on the toilet, or take them to the toilet, and just, even if they don't go, they get used to the routine of going there, and then maybe after a few months they might start going to the toilet when they're there. So make it fun and make it routine, and speak to your class teacher if you want more advice specific to your child. So I'll move on to my next slide. This is something that comes up very, very, very often in toddler only. How much milk does my child need? Now, obviously, we are not medical experts, and we're not replacing the advice of your doctor or paediatrician. But what we do have is our UK government guidelines and the training that we're given in the UK as a British school. And in the UK, the NHS, or our National Health Service guidelines, state that formula milk is not needed after 1 year of age. That's not to say children can't have it, but it's not required as part of their diet. So that's really interesting, because in Thailand, we see huge aisles of formula in supermarkets. It's available everywhere, and there are millions of different brands, all saying that they'll do something special for your child. And it's obviously your choice whether you choose to incorporate that into part of your child's diet. But by our UK guidelines, it is not an essential part of a child's diet. At toddler only and at parent toddler, when children have snacks, we offer fresh cow's milk and water, and children can choose between that at snack time. Obviously, if children are being breastfed at home, then we would always encourage for that to carry on as long as the children and the parents are comfortable doing that. And a lot of research shows that if they breastfeed into toddlerhood, that has huge benefits for them. But anyway, we don't offer milk as an essential part of the child's diet in parent toddler or toddler only. We do quite often have children coming to toddlers age 2 who are very, very, very reliant on formula milk still. Sometimes children come to us who are unable to eat solid food. And that's a real worry to us, because actually they need to be incorporating different solid foods in their diet from a much younger age. I'll come on to food in a little bit more on my next slide. My second point is, it might be messy at first, but please be patient. Your child will learn to drink from an open cup. So at toddlers and toddler only and parent toddler, when we have snack time and lunchtime, we give children open top cups to drink from. Now, quite often it's messy at first, because children have to learn how to use that cup. But it's really important that they learn that. And again, UK guidelines suggest that they shouldn't be using bottles after the age of 1. From 6 months, they should start being given an open top cup. Something I would say is that if you have support at home, if you have nannies that work with your children or grandparents, quite often nannies are very keen to give children cups with straws or bottles, because it's easier, it's quicker, and it doesn't make a mess, and they're worried about making a mess in the house. But actually, children need practice using their hands, developing all the coordination they need to drink from an open top cup. So it would really help us if you could reassure nannies or other people supporting your children at home of the importance of drinking from an open top cup. And as we say here, feeding from a bottle, we would discourage that after the age of 1. And I know that Amy, you've got some extra things to add to that from a speech and language perspective.
Yeah, I touched on this briefly earlier, and the same as talking about using a dummy. So I've included just a small image here in case we're not sure what I'm referring to. So if your child is using a dummy or a bottle that has one of these teats on the top, that's something that we need to think very carefully about. This is because as our children are learning to move their mouth in different ways, so they may be exploring things like smiling, blowing bubbles, making noises, chewing, and talking. If they have something in their mouth obstructing that and changing the way that they're moving their teeth, their lips, and their tongue, then they're not going to be able to develop some of those skills as quickly or as effectively as we would like them to. Okay, so in terms of dummy and bottle use, what we would suggest is stopping that at around about the age of a year, and thinking about exposing your child to using, as Hannah said, having that open cup Even before then, even before you're making that switch out from stopping using a bottle, just getting your child used to having it around and experience it can be really helpful. So we do know, as I say, that using baby bottles with those teats, or using a dummy for an extended period of time beyond that 1 year or 12-month period, it can have some detrimental impact. It can have some negative effects on a child's speech development. And it can also, overuse can also actually physically change the shape of a child's mouth, because it can change the placement of their teeth, and it can change the shape of the roof of their mouth, the palate. Okay, so that's why I, from a speech therapy perspective, always recommend stopping that use as far as possible. We know it can be tricky. We know it can be a hard habit to break. So if your child is using these items, please do talk to us, because we've got some tips and things that we can share with you that you can try at home. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. There's one more question that I'm going to answer, and then we'll move on to Mr. Foster just for our last couple of questions. So I know there's so much information here, but there's so much that we want to share with you. My last question is, what should my child be eating? Now, again, I can't replace the advice of your own personal doctors, but what I can do is talk to you about our UK guidelines that we are trained with and that our government recommends. So in the UK, the recommendation is that children should start eating solid food at 6 months of age. And that solid food is usually an approach that we call in the UK baby-led weaning. And I've put on a link at the bottom of this slide if you want to refer to it later. These slides will be shared with you if you would like some more information about it. Now, baby-led weaning is the approach that most health professionals in the UK recommend to parents, and that is essentially finger foods. So foods that children can pick up by themselves and put in their own mouths, rather than spoon feeding into your children's mouth. In reality, in the UK, most families do a mixture. They might do some finger foods for children, and some families might do some spoon feeding as well. With my own children, we did baby-led weaning only from 6 months, and I never put food in my children's mouth, and it worked brilliantly for us. But things work differently for different families. So the idea is you give children food that they can hold in their hands. So it might be like a long stick of broccoli, something that's quite soft and easy to eat, but they can hold in their hand, and they can enjoy playing with it. And at first, it just looks like they're playing with it. It doesn't look like they're eating much, but you'll notice over time that they start to eat more and more. They do say that it takes 10 attempts at trying to eat a piece of food for children to become confident enough to eat it. Those early stages of exploring, squishing, holding are really helpful in them learning to trust new foods and to try out new foods. So baby-led weaning and finger food is what we would recommend from 6 months. Now, after the age of 1, hold on, I've missed a slide, sorry. So I've put children should be encouraged to explore foods and be allowed to feed themselves at an early age. Okay, after the age of 1, food should start making up a larger proportion of their diet. So it's a difficult balance to have, but we need to try not to fill them up on milk. I know some of our children drink huge amounts of milk, and then they're not hungry when it comes to eating food. So it's getting that balance right. Usually UK health professionals recommend giving children maybe a little bit of milk so that they're not starving hungry before they start eating a meal. So they're not stressed, but not so much that it will fill them up. And then food time can be fun. They can enjoy playing with the food and enjoying experimenting with the food. And then if they're still hungry later, then they can have some milk if they like. But we really need to see that balance shifting from milk to solid food around the age of 1. And the other point that I've put on there is it's really important for us to eat with our children and make meal times sociable and fun. Something we do in toddler only and parent toddler is our staff sit with the children when they have their snack, and we enjoy a snack with them. And the same for lunchtime. We eat our lunch with the children, because modeling eating is a really important part of children learning to enjoy meal times, to find meal times are sociable. It's a time when we talk to each other. It's a time when we try new foods. And also, you know, showing them, oh, look, mummy's eating some apple. Why don't you try? Might make them more inclined to try new foods. Something that we know happens is that, again, if nannies or other people are looking after your children, they're trying to feed them quickly, and quite often they're worried about making a mess at home. So they spoon feed the children quickly, so there's no mess that happens. And quite often, some children are spoon fed while they're watching the TV or something on the iPad or on YouTube to keep them sat still. but the children are missing out on all the social parts of having a meal and all of the parts of feeling it and experimenting with it. So they might eat solid food rather than puree on a spoon. So we would really encourage you as much as possible to eat with your children. If the meal times aren't the same and it's difficult for you and you have people looking after your children, maybe that's something you can suggest to your nannies or other carers who help your children to sit and eat food together. It makes all the difference. And when your children get to the stage where you can enjoy family meals together, it's a really important time for family communication. Just as Amy mentioned, it's a time for speaking. Masks are not worn. There's talking, there's turn taking, you're modeling communication, and you're also modeling how you can enjoy food and get them to try a big variety of food. The last thing from me is establishing routines with food. So at school, we have routines around sitting at the table, passing out our plates, sharing out the food, tidying up at the end, washing hands. So whatever routines you can bring into your meal times at home will really help your children enjoy it and feel comfortable and not find it a time when they're anxious. So that's all from me on food. I'm just going to pass over to Mr. Foster, who's going to talk briefly about play and independence.
Is this one me or you, Miss Hannah?
I've got it as you, but I can do it if you like.
I can do it. No, well, why is play important? I think we've touched on this throughout the presentation, really. Play is critical for young children learning how to communicate, for their language development, for their social interactions. As I talked about quite a little bit before, play is very, very important in helping your child to build relationships, to share, to interact with their peers. And as we talked about before, there are various different stages of play that your child may exhibit. And in terms of learning and development, cognitive development, learning new skills, acquiring new knowledge, play is the absolute fundamental way in which young children of this age acquire those skills and that knowledge. Play encourages problem solving, creativity, cooperation, thinking skills, retrieval, memory practice, linking of learning. All of these things we have within our school in our high performance learning framework. And we see these behaviors with our children as they are in play. Play is fun, is joyful. It helps our children to feel calm and relaxed. Play helps our children to problem solve, to be creative. They are engaged and they are motivated. Young children need to see the point and value in what they're doing. It has to have a purpose. And the way children learn best is when they are motivated, when they can see the purpose. And of course, all the time, adults are not just sitting passively by and watching this play happen. They are planning for learning opportunities to happen within the play. Our curriculum is a play-based curriculum at school, but we're not a play group. We have a carefully planned and structured curriculum based around developmental milestones expected for children of various ages within the early years. So play is crucially important. It's also important that children have play that is different to the play they may experience at school. They have that leisure time play out of school. So giving your children time to have plenty of creative play without distractions. So we talk a lot about open-ended resources, things like boxes, strings, sellotape, those type of resources where children can really, really be creative and go with it. I had a child come to see me today who'd used some boxes and some tape and some paper and some cups, some water cups to create a castle. We hadn't planned for that. We didn't know that was going to happen, but the child was able to use her own experiences to create this wonderful castle, which involved thinking about the shape of the tower, involved cutting out different shapes to create flag bunting around the outside of it. All of this we couldn't possibly have planned for, but it was a fantastic way of that child being able to develop their creativity and linking their learning to their experiences. They could see that the shape of the water cup resembled a turret on a castle and could incorporate that. So all of that open-ended play is really, really important for cognitive development, for children's learning. Join in with your child's play, of course, is important, but let them lead you. Yeah, it's really important that children have a sense of ownership in their play. Go with what they want to do, but guide them. We call it in our practice being judicious, thinking about making the right choices. When do I interact? When do I suggest or comment on something? And another thing is allow your child to take risks during play. And we mean balanced risks. Risks help your child to become independent. And that's the net that leads me very nicely into my next slide, which is all about independence and how I can help my child to be independent. So young children, they're born to be independent. We know that the first words that many babies or that many toddlers will say is no, me do. That need, that want to be independent, to do things for themselves is innate, it's there. And at around 7 months old, a baby becomes aware cognitively that they are independent from their primary parent or caregiver. When we think of independence, we're not just talking about doing things for yourself, which of course is important, but thinking for yourself and having what we term in school a growth mindset. So it's those values and attitudes and dispositions towards things that help children to be successful later on in life. So it's about approaching challenges and obstacles with an attitude that they can be overcome by practice, by trying different strategies, by not giving up. All of those really critical life skills that help children as they move along through their education and through their life. We can support this in various different ways, primarily by not doing everything for our children. Okay, and we need to avoid that over-reliance on thinking that they can't do things, that they are very, very capable, even at a very, very young age, with practice and perseverance. Very often nannies are paid to do a job and they feel as though they should be doing everything for the children because that's what their job is. But in fact, actually, helping your child to be independent and do things for themselves is far, far more valuable. If you think of the sort of antonym to independence, it's dependent. And we don't want our children to be dependent on others in life. We want them to be independent thinkers who are able to do things for themselves. Dressing and organization is another way we can help our children to be independent. Obviously, we don't expect toddlers to be able to dress themselves necessarily, but we might be able to start to help them to be able to do things like put and take on their shoes. We might be able to, as we're helping them put on their shorts, can they lift them up themselves? Hands in the air, can you help me? Those early stages, helping your child to be organized. What do we need to do first? What do we need to do next? Sequencing things, breaking tasks down into smaller chunks. Like Hannah talked about before, feeding is important, and we do encourage children to, as well as the importance of using our hands, as Hannah said, to start to be able to use a spoon and fork as well to be able to feed themselves. We shouldn't be having adults with a spoon putting food into toddler age children's mouths. We want to promote health and good hygiene. So like Hannah was talking about before, we are washing our hands constantly. We are talking to our children about the importance of going to the toilet independently, and we're supporting them to do this. At home, you can encourage your child to help with simple tasks such as tidying away their own toys. It's very tempting to do this for them because it's quicker and you need to get out and you've got an appointment. But actually, the long-term value in persevering with these sorts of things does help your child to become independent. As I've just alluded to, having patience is very, very important because things do take time, and we understand that you need to think about what the best time of day is to do this. So if you're wanting to, for example, back to dressing, help your child to learn how to put their shoes on, you need to think of when's the best time. If you've woken up late and you've got a long drive into school, taking that time to do that might not be the best time then. So thinking of when's an appropriate time to build these things in. Think about how you talk to your children. We need to be authentic when we speak to children. We need to not patronize them. They need to feel valued. They need to feel respected. You need to be using language around growth mindset. So have you tried doing it this way? For example, a typical thing we may see in early years is a child attempting to do a jigsaw puzzle, and they may be struggling to put the shape of the puzzle in the correct hole, and they may appear to be frustrated or even upset with that. As an adult, the tempting thing to do might be to say, put it in that hole and that will work. That child might get immediate gratification because that's happened, but actually they won't have learned anything in terms of being independent. So the best thing to do to encourage that growth mindset would be to suggest a different approach. Or what if you turn it that way? Have you tried this? Have you thought about this? Look at that hole. Look at the shape carefully. All of these little things that appear to be so superficial are really important at building and developing that growth mindset. So that brings us nicely to the end of our presentation. I do apologize that we've run over by a few minutes. I do hope you found the advice and tips we've given you here really useful and helpful. We will put a recording of this onto our parent portal, copy of the presentation, and a version in Thai. If there are any questions whatsoever, please do type into the chat or the Q&A box. So I don't think any questions are coming through at the moment. So we will leave it there and say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a lovely evening. Thank you again. Goodbye.